I think the mind's eye is a navigator, and those visions, concepts that we adopt, um, can be directional. So good, bad, or otherwise, you put those visions in your subconscious mind. I think we start to navigate in that direction, and that's actually also a really important um, concept or topic for people that are looking at change or goal setting, is to simply understand that things, I believe anyway, things become or begin with a vision.
This episode of the Smart Athlete Podcast is brought to you by Solpre. If you're active at all, whether you're running or simply out walking for the day, you've probably experienced one of the number one problems that active people have, and that's chafing. Solpre's all-new, all-natural anti-chafe balm solves that problem while feeding your skin the vital nutrients it needs to be healthy. If you'd like to stop chafing once and for all and treat your body right, go to solpri.com to check out the anti-chafe balm today. That's SOLPRI.com. Welcome to the Smart Athlete Podcast. My guest today has a little bit of an interesting career. He started in banking, and if you're on the YouTube version, and I say this in a loving way, he doesn't necessarily look like a banker, though maybe a banker I'd probably like to have, I guess I'd say. He's currently the VP of Business Development for ToolCASE. It's a Denver-based technology company that is working on real-time analytics in the banking industry. He's the founder of NOZERODAYS.com. It's an athlete collective and emerging lifestyle brand. We're definitely going to talk about that. He's been an endurance athlete for over 30 years and recently has finished a kind of unique event that, as far as he or definitely I might know, he may be the first person to have finished that. So welcome to the show, Sam Piccolotti.
Jesse, pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Is it a good thing that I said you don't look like a banker, or is that a bad thing? Is it?
No, yeah. Well, I'm not a banker anymore, so
okay.
So maybe it's the evolution. No, we're all good.
I just, and if you're not on the YouTube version, Sam's got a nice beard, which I could never grow. I'm always jealous when guests come on with the beards.
Don't be, but it took me 50 years to get here. So
worth it. You're like sweet Colorado. Is that like a No Zero Days hat or?
It is. Yeah, it's my NCD hat.
Yeah, I was like, you've got the Colorado logo on it. There's some mountains in the background, and then like the smaller logo. I was like, I think it's a No Zero Days logo, and then the big banner in the background. Like you're dressed well. So if you're not on the YouTube version, youtube.com/Solpre, you can check it out there. But you're missing out. You're always missing out when you're missing the guest actual conversation. So maybe the question we'll start off with, try to break the ice, is how do I improve my wardrobe? Where do you go shopping? And can I get a sweet hat? Like, what are we doing here?
The hat is something I put together for NCD a couple of years back. Been quite popular, actually. Company's Boco Gear out of Colorado, and it was a design we came up with. But there's NCD apparel available on the NCD store, NOZERODAYS.com. I don't think you'll find any of the hats there at the moment, but there's some other swag there you can grab.
I've had a love-hate relationship over time with hats. I felt like for a long time it just made my head look weird, and then I don't know if I got older, my head changed shape. Maybe I just stopped being a child and like my head finally formed or something. But it seems like in the last, I don't know, maybe post-college, I guess I'll say, like I've slowly started picking up more hats. I like wear the 70.3 hats you get at like every race. I wear those to work out. I've got, different like race hats that kind of look like yours. So I don't know why it is, but it seems like my like brain starts gravitating towards them. And if I let myself, I might have an inordinate hat collection of which I would never end up wearing all of them.
How about cowboy hats, man?
Well, I live in Kansas City, so
City, right?
That would be pretty typical. I don't think I would stand out for wearing cowboy hats. Not my particular bend. Although I will say that takes me back a minute to high school. I did a self-portrait for my college art class in high school with the cowboy hat on. Um, it
You
was
may
not
need to
me.
revisit that, bud.
Yeah, was not me, but maybe, maybe there's a part of me, because I am from Kansas City, that I'm a cowboy down deep and I want to be raise cows or something. I don't know. My dad grew up on a farm. I did not. So I'm not quite sure that I got that gene or got that urge, but maybe we'll see.
I
Maybe
don't
I'll
know.
invite you
Little,
down and then we'll like
yeah,
go
little
check out
little
some
two
cows.
little barbecue and a two-step, and you're right back in it.
So something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to ask you a little bit about kind of your development, I guess, over time in terms of your career. You said you're not a banker anymore. Um, the I have friends who are endurance athletes who, I think he lives in Baltimore now. He lived in New York, lives in Baltimore, and he wants to be in investment banking. He makes a lot of money. Uh, why would you leave banking? It seems like it's a good place to make a living.
You know, I can't say I ever aspired to be in banking, but early on in my career out of school, I'd been working for my uncle, who's a home builder, and I was selling homes for him, and and I, I had banking representatives coming in that were doing financing for us and that kind of thing, and it looked like a good gig. And these guys were dressed nice, and they come in driving nice cars, and as a young 20 something, I thought, you know, maybe that's something I should look at. And one of the guys one day said to me, Sam, you really got a knack for for numbers and putting these financing terms together. Like, have you ever thought about banking? And I thought, well, no, I hadn't, but maybe I will. And anyway, I pursued an opportunity in banking. Started off as a mortgage loan originator, and I've always had a thirst for new things and knowledge, and trying to um, see my potential in different areas. And so it looked like a fun challenge. But I immediately taken to it. I started doing really well. I'd been recruited into a couple different roles, landed an opportunity with what, excuse me, was First Union Bank at that time. The First Union Bank was in a race at that point. This is the mid 90s, in a race with Nations Bank to become one of the nation's largest banks. They're both headquartered down there in Charlotte. They called me and asked if I'd be interested in looking at running consumer credit for them in the state of Pennsylvania. And I didn't know much about consumer credit. They seemed to think I had potential in that role. So I thought,
Yeah.
okay, I'll take a look. Anyway, I got the job. I fell pretty quickly into success there. Ran for them what was the largest producing market for First Union for several years. Was high performer in that. Out of 5 states, was top performer in that area. That opened up new challenges with me at the institution, as they were growing and expanding. They called upon me to step into other segments of the bank and take over retail market for them. And I quickly found myself, on a wild ride of promotion and change. I think I was with First Union 10 years. I had been 9 times realigned in 10 years. So one of your questions, like, why would I get out of banking? Because frankly, I got tired of running that gauntlet. I had been fortunate to always land on my feet in a better position, or at least better from a promotional standpoint. But I realized that it really wasn't where I wanted to be. I had been absorbed in that career, started a family, had this passion for fitness and triathlon that I was trying to balance. And I quickly found myself in a place where I was imbalanced. I wasn't happy. I was, working essentially 7 to 7, and trying to be attentive to my wife and my my growing family, and yet my own personal desires and interests to stay in the world of triathlon, or in the recreational world of triathlon, and having a tough time with it. And I had this lifelong ambition to move west. And I kind of thought that at some point, that banking progression was going to lead me there through acquisitions. And it turns out that, it did. First Union became Wachovia. Wachovia became Wells Fargo, a Western headquartered bank, but not in time enough for me to make the change that I wanted. So in 2001, I had an opportunity to take a severance package with them. And I thought, this is time to reinvent myself. I started business with the ambitions of bringing that business westward. And although that didn't work out, the westward expansion of that business, I ended up selling the business and moving west in 2004. And in exiting banking, I still involved in the banking industry. My clients are predominantly financial institutions. So I've got that acumen, I've got that background, but I'm not a banker anymore, so to speak. But it really gave me an opportunity to pursue other lifelong ambitions.
What I think is always an interesting question for most people, and like you, I think it changes for many people over time, is this. I think back to when I was a kid, I think it was in Sunday school, we were doing an exercise about, the false dichotomy, I like to point out, of would you rather do a job you love but get paid little, or do a job you hate and get paid a lot? And I do like to point out that it's a false dichotomy, because you don't necessarily have to, it's not, if you make a lot of money, you're going to hate your job. You could potentially find a job you like that also makes a lot of money, and then it's harmonious. But it's interesting how we kind of shift priorities over time, right? Where I think it's easy for us to see ourselves sometimes as almost static. Like, I am this person, like I am a runner, I am a triathlete, I am this thing. But it's, the reality is there's so much more ebb and flow to our lives, who we think we are, what we want. And
amen, for sure.
Just acknowledging that, I think, is difficult. It's hard to accept. I'll say dynamic systems. It's the kind of like mathy brain in me there. But it's just interesting to see how that changes. And I think for most people, it will change. I think there's very few people that are like, this is the one path, like from the time I'm 18 to the time I'm 80. Like, I'm just,
well, I think you're right. And it's tough. I remember, going through those challenges. It wasn't Sunday school, but just throughout high school, when you're trying to figure out what your next juncture is after graduating, going to college. What are you going to be for the rest of your life, right? And I think things, at least maybe it's true of people in my generation, and they may be trying to work to instill different concepts and ideas in their kids, but when I was growing up, it's like, well, you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a cop, a fireman. I mean, pick something. Yeah. And frankly, I remember my father, and maybe this subconsciously is why I ended up in banking, but I started off with the concept of in high school, I was going to go to school for cinematography. I wanted to be a wildlife cinematographer. I wanted to be that guy in National Geographic that was down in the tundra,
sitting in the bush for a year trying to get one picture. Yeah.
And I remember my father saying, you got to do something practical. And practical,
the good intentions of all parents there.
Sure, right. And I don't know, you might be right. I appreciate what you're saying in reference to a false dichotomy, but for some people it is a very chosen path, and they find a lot of solace in staying that path. Just not me, not my dynamic. And I think there are many like us that continue to want to see the evolution, the possibilities of who we are, and what our potential might be in different areas. And right, wrong, or different, I'm probably plagued with that.
But to be fair, it could just simply be me projecting because I have so many interests. And like you, well, it was starting college. I started as a music composition major. I wanted to score films, and I changed out of the major because I was like, how am I going to make a living scoring film? There's only, of all the films that are made, like major motion pictures, I think there's like 200-ish a year. Like there's only a handful of people that really make a living in that industry. But then yet here I am coming back around 10 years later, working on composition and, like I'm scoring a short film right now for practice, not for pay, and kind of trying to refine that interest, knowing that maybe I can do both and not worry about the pay side because I do other things. So it's, again, could just be projection on my part where I go, everybody must do this weird squirrely like adventure thing that I seem to be doing.
I don't know. I think the mind's eye is a navigator, and those visions, concepts that we adopt, can be directional. So good, bad, or otherwise, you put those visions in your subconscious mind. I think we start to navigate in that direction, and that's actually also a really important concept or topic for people that are looking at change or goal setting, is to simply understand that things, I believe anyway, things become or begin with a vision.
Mm-hmm.
And we often end up in those places and not realize. I remember, you familiar with the audiobook or the movie, the Secret?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a segment in there that talks about and profiles this guy who had ambitions to live in a certain house or something, and then found himself in a period in his life where he's questioning his his presence and his existence and wondering, and then went through an old box and looked at a photograph of a house that he aspired to always live in, and realized that, wow, I'm living in that house. And he did not realize that he had actually come to realize his dream.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe for you, maybe for me, maybe for that guy, then there's something else. But
Right.
for others, maybe that's where they lay their stake. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's an issue with contentment and trying to find contentment. I'm reading a book right now. I'm going to bring up the title. It's about this Japanese concept called Ikigai. It's called Ikigai, the Japanese secret to a long and happy life. And it studies, there's these what are referred to as blue zones on the planet, which are like the places and towns on the earth that have the longest lived and happiest residents.
Mm-hmm.
And the concept basically it's like a Venn diagram of 4 factors. It's like, what are you good at? What can you get paid for? What do you enjoy doing? And what brings you fulfillment? Is that the 4th one? Anyway, it's like trying to find the intersection of all these things. So that's why I like come back to that like false dichotomy. It's trying to find this one thing that hits all the stuff for you, where you're happy doing it, you can make a living doing it, you're providing value to other people, all that kind of stuff. So I think maybe if you can find that, then maybe you're content, or maybe it's a realization that contentment is being satisfied with what you have now, even if you are striving for something else.
Well, that'd be the Zen component of that.
Right.
I've often said, like, happiness doesn't have an address.
Right.
It's it's feeling, it's emotion, it's an experience, and that can shift and that can change.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Interesting topic. I'm going to pick up the book.
Good.
If I can find
Good.
it. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I'll after we get done, I'll type it or send you a link or something. It's a pretty short read, so it's pretty digestible. But it's something I'm thinking about because I actually like I'm going through the literal rebranding of Soulfree right now, to try to visually represent my idea a little bit more. Of the brand is focused on both athletes' minds and bodies, because so many brands are just focused on like, okay, this is how many reps you need to do, and this is the pace you need to and run, and just it's like, okay, great, but like there's a whole engine that's running all of that that we like to ignore, and that's part of the kind of nice part about this podcast is I get to talk to intelligent people that are well thought out, and we can have these conversations about what is contentment versus happiness. Um, but that kind of brings me to, you kind of moving on your journey, starting No Zero Days. What from banking to there, like what's the juncture, in the river of life? Where does that tributary branch off and get started?
Yeah. So in the early onset of of my banking career, if you will, when things got pretty demanding, um, I got married in 1993, and immediately we had a child in 1994, and I was working diligently to try to be successful in my career, and the time I had. I'm going to back up for a minute, so I'll take you back 1985. Uh, while in school, I was a swimmer growing up. I'd been a pretty competitive and decent swimmer. My cousin was doing a triathlon in a relay format, and asked me if I'd be on the team and do the swimming leg.
Mm-hmm.
He had this elite team that he was hoping to win his relay, was hoping to be a number one relay. And so they pulled me in and asked if I'd do the swim. And I didn't know anything about triathlon. And I said, well, how long's the swim? And he said, a mile. I was like, well, okay, a mile, no big deal. I could probably bang that out, even though I haven't been training. So I got in the pool, a couple times. I did a few swims and thought, okay, I could bang this mile out. That shouldn't be a big deal. And showed up race morning, hit the water. And I've been a lifelong asthmatic, and it brought its challenges to me as a young athlete. Swimming seemed to be an easier outlet for me from an exercise standpoint. Anything that had anything to do with running, I was challenged with, and was often benched, even recess at times. But swimming seemed to present more of an opportunity for whatever reason from an asthma perspective. But as misfortune would have it, that morning I get out, I'm battling out with a few lead guys. I get a couple 100 meters in, I get an asthma attack. And, I immediately realize I'm in trouble, and I'm trying to go buoy to buoy and just, kind of manage the stress and the anxiety of, now the asthma and whether or not I was going to be able to make it through it. And it didn't work. And I ended up getting pulled into a boat, put in an ambulance, put on oxygen. And I was just totally humiliated. Just totally humiliated. I never met the runner. He was at T2 waiting for the cyclist who never got to clip in. And
right.
And I just, I was devastated. So at that point I thought, man, that's it. I'm young 20s, but like, I'm going to cure this thing. I'm going to do everything that's hard for me and see if I can do more of that and if I can overcome my asthma. So I start swimming, biking, and running, trying to defeat asthma, which didn't work, but it set me on a path.
Does this sound like it's like the start of a great movie? Like I defeated asthma.
Right. But it put me on a path of triathlon training and racing, and I really enjoyed it. I was also really into the martial arts at the time, and had stayed with martial arts for a long time. So I had this fitness background, this athlete background, but it put me into this new area of passion and interest. And as my career was taking off, I found it harder and harder to sustain that. Right, like so, we had these Monday night rides and Wednesday night, group rides, and and I had folks that I was training with, a local group of triathletes in Pennsylvania I was training with on weekends, and we'd do our swim, bike, run thing on a weekend. And then it became the kind of thing where I couldn't make the Monday ride because I was working. I couldn't make the Wednesday ride. The weekends, I was busy with family, and now, I feel obligated. I'm taking time away from, my wife and my child at the time. And it just, I couldn't balance it. I couldn't figure it out. And I became really frustrated, like many people do, trying to balance their lives and their other interests. That summer of 2000, so now fast forward a little bit to 2001, my wife's niece was hiking the Appalachian Trail. She graduated from college. She was a Division I athlete and took on the Appalachian Trail. And I just coincidentally had been reading the book, A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. I don't know if you caught the movie or the book. Good book, by the way, still a good book. I think it'd be a great read, but the movie, it was okay. Robert Redford and Nick Nolte, I think, starred in that film. And if I remember, the kind of the plot of the movie, it was these two guys who had kind of become middle-aged, knew each other in high school, and ended up, overweight, whatever, and life, had kind of intervened, and they wanted to reconnect by hiking the Appalachian Trail. Anyway, read the book, really inspired, intrigued by, what drives people to go out and take months off their lives and put themselves in, into the wilderness and hike this, trail. And, many times just the solo experience of doing that. It was just really intriguing to me. So when Kelly was hiking, she was coming through Pennsylvania. There's an intersection not far from her mom's home, and her mom was going to hold a barbecue in the backyard for her when she was passing through on her way to Katahdin. And I wanted to be there. So we went over, and I couldn't wait to meet some of these people. She kind of came in with a group of trail mates that just happened to, be navigating through with her at that point in juncture. And, I couldn't wait to talk to them and get in their heads and find out what was driving them, doing this kind of thing. But by my account, and mind you, I'm no expert, but I read the book, and I started to understand, through hiking a little bit on the Appalachian Trail. But by my account, they were about 30 days behind preferred schedule, meaning that they were going to hit Katahdin in the winter. If they did, this is August, they didn't step up their game, like, it was going to be cold. And so whatever they were provisions they had, packing maybe down to 40 pounds or whatever, that changes that dynamic quickly. Now you're in cold weather hiking, and it makes it that much more difficult. So I was curious as to whether or not, these people thought they were going to make it because they were so far behind schedule. And I asked Kelly, I said, hey, do you think you're going to make it to Katahdin before the snow flies? And she said, I don't know. We've had a lot of 0 days. And I thought, wow, like, how could you just not move one day? You've got this big task in front of you, like, to just not hike a mile that day and just hang out in the woods, knowing that you've got, 600 or 800 miles ahead of you or whatever it was. And it immediately hit me, Jess, that, man, I'm using these same excuses in my life. Like I was of the mindset back then, you and I were talking about earlier, this old school triathlon training kind of a mentality where more is better. And I firmly believed if I didn't have 2 hours for a bike ride, it was not worth my time to get on a bike. I remember my wife going to a spin class. It was 45 minutes long and balking, like 45 minutes, like how hard can that be?
Yeah.
And until I took my first spin class. But at the time I had that mindset. So I was not going to the gym. I was not getting on the bike. I wasn't doing these things because I didn't have this perceived amount of time available. And so I thought, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to do something every day, regardless of how much time I have. And of course, the rest is kind of history. I started that in 2001 and I've done something every day since, but that was the juncture, if you will, for me. And from a career perspective, I was still in a demanding career. I wasn't going to lose the obligation or the commitment I had to my family. So I needed to figure out a way to balance the other things that were important in my life, and my health and my fitness, desires. And that's kind of how that all came together.
That mindset in for you listening, if you listen to the podcast regularly, you've heard me say this at some point to a guest. I can't remember who. This is a quote I picked up somewhere on Reddit, so I have no idea who the original author is. There's this idea that people are talking about that if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. And at first, you're like, what are you talking about? And it's exactly that idea you're saying. If I don't have 2 hours to do it, I'm not going to do it at all. But it's like, well, yeah, maybe you don't have 2 hours, but you got 20 minutes. Like 20 minutes is better than a big goose egg for the day. And I think it's acknowledging like the reality, number one, of just how busy our lives can be, but then also knowing that there is still some benefit to be gained from maybe you only have 5 minutes. Can you get 20 push-ups in? That's better than nothing.
Exactly. And I'll often say to people, because look, I get that objection a lot. Like, oh yeah, well, you must have the time. It's like, okay. And my comeback often, and not, in a critical manner, but I'll just say, how many push-ups can you do in a minute? And it just seems like the average male's somewhere around 30, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, okay, well, are you going to judge me? And I'm like, no, I'm not judging. I'm just curious. Like, have you ever tried just to see how many push-ups you can do in a minute? And well, no. I'm like, well, let me know. And they come back with the number, and just use that number 30.
Mm-hmm.
You take 30 and you multiply that by 365 days.
Mm-hmm.
You end up pretty close to 11,000 push-ups.
Mm-hmm.
And then I come back and I say, do you think 11,000 push-ups will make a difference? Do you know anybody that's done 11,000 push-ups in a year? And what if? And the reality is you have a minute, right? And you probably have more than a minute. You probably have 10 minutes, whatever the time frame is. But I'm gonna tell you what it's done for me. Certainly there are some, and I don't have data behind it except my own existence, right? But but 20 years of doing something every day it's paid off.
Mm-hmm.
And it started to pay off quickly for me back then. I may not have been in the best biking shape. I may not have been in the best running shape, but I was in the game, and I could still show up and I could still compete. And because, like yourself, I've got an interest in, in a multifaceted of exercise routines, regimes, and I'll limit myself to one thing. I've stayed pretty healthy, and I've stayed, pretty physically adapted, but really the other benefit is it took me out of the emotional cycle and roller coaster of being in and out of shape.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me has been probably the most beneficial component of, this NZD kind of mantra and philosophy, is that I don't beat myself up mentally. I don't have that negative self-talk and defamating conversation with myself. Like, man, why even bother? I mean, it's you haven't been on a bike in 3 weeks, or you haven't been to the gym, or you haven't been at a pool, or you're not where you were. Those conversations are gone. Mm-hmm. And if they come into my mental framework at all, they're there just for a fragment of time, and I can quickly say, no, I'm good. I did something today, and I'm going to do something tomorrow, or I've been doing something. So I think that's probably one of the most valuable things that I've personally gained out of this, is that I don't have that mental roller coaster of feeling down or defeated because I'm not putting the time
in. How much of your job, I guess I'll say, we're trying to like coaching athletes and trying to work on people. How much of your job is not working out their body, but like getting their mind to be in a place where it's stronger at combating itself, combating that negative self-talk, where it's like, it's common. People have these thoughts, oh, you're not good enough. You're not putting enough training in. You need to be faster. You're not, all of these things. Everybody, the voices that people have are different, but it's very, very common. very
Yeah.
common.
Yeah.
And it takes, in my opinion, it takes practice. Just like you want to learn to run fast, you're going to have to put in the time to run fast. You got to build your base. I think it takes the same kind of thing with your brain, where you're like, maybe today it's 100% negative self-talk. And then tomorrow you just interject one little thing and now you're down to 99% negative self-talk. And it seems like then that negative self-talk can come back and be like, well, I'm stronger. It's like, for now, for now. So,
Yeah.
so how much of your time do you spend doing that?
More time than I anticipated. It would be when I started working, with athletes. And I don't think you can separate them. I think it's the yin and yang of the whole, the holistic component of this thing. For me, and what I try to coach or allow clients to realize is that mental strength, mental resilience, if you will, can be obtained through physical stress and suffering. We know that the mind can leave the body to do, incredible things. But what I think is discounted is the advantage or the strength that is gained emotionally from applying, physical challenges and physical stress. That in a myopic standpoint, like you just look at the hormone benefit and emotional gain from a workout, right? You almost always feel better going in or coming out than you did going into a workout, right?
Right.
But there's a Japanese, I can't think of the correct pronunciation of the Japanese term, for the expression, but continuance is power. And it translates for me really well into NOZERODAYS, and the fact that, that constant, steady application of training and routine builds strength and builds power. It's true for the body, and it's true for the mind. And if you're doing both, I think that's where you really capitalize on that. So yeah, definitely more time than not. And even very seasoned athletes lose sight of the fact of how much the mental component can benefit or hold them back, physically. And I've always admired, like, if you look at Olympic athletes, right?
Right.
That athlete, right? He wins a gold medal on that day. They get that one shot, maybe, and they've been training a lifetime, right? Their entire career.
Right.
And they get that one shot and they put it together and they make it happen that day. I mean, that's just incredible. Certainly, training, both physically and mentally comes into play to be able to execute on that. There's a lot of good fortune and good luck that happens at the same time. But for the rest of us, that are, recreational or just trying to make changes in our life or balance that career and in these, these other, interests or components of our lives like fitness and wellness, you're going to have pitfalls. You're going to deal with it, right? It's going to happen. You're going to have injuries. It's going to take you down. But if you can establish that foundation of consistently putting in the time and building up that foundation, it gives you the resilience to rely on when those things do happen. I mean, that's been my experience anyway.
Yeah. It's like, as you were talking about it, I could be wrong, because this has been, I have to think about this. This has been not quite a year, but almost a year now. As you're talking about it, reminded me of, I had a conversation with Kim Vandenberg, who is Olympic bronze medalist in swimming from the 2008 Olympics. And I think we were talking about the same kind of thing about just the mental resilience that gets built over time through physicality. It's episode 97 for you, the listener, if you want to check that out and see whether I'm accurate or not in that conversation. But I know that I've had that conversation with somebody. I think it was one of the Olympic athletes that's been on the show, but just like the realization that it is it's a harmony, right? That they do affect each other in both directions, not just one or the other. And thinking along those lines, I want to talk a little bit about, I don't know what to call it, so you can tell me what to call it, but your big event that you did, and then the kind of subsequent follow-up to that, if you'll introduce it, I guess.
Yeah, sure. You're referring to the Mountain Man Challenge that I did
Yes.
in 2020. So it really began in 2018, February 2018, to be specific. I was toying around with, what kind of big, audacious goal could I give myself, to really test my both physical and mental, capacities. For me, it's always been as much testing my mental, capability as much as physical capability. And I had, like many folks that get, on this endurance track and this Ironman track, I started looking at Ultraman competitions and thinking about those, and they seem kind of daunting and inspiring, but they weren't unique. There's still hundreds of people that are doing it a year, and so it didn't really capture, the full intrigue that I had on a test or whatever. And I woke up at like 3 o'clock in the morning in February of 2018. Just I sat up out of bed. I was like, I know what I want to do. And so, moving west was lifelong ambition, and living in the mountains, and, having that kind of a lifestyle and opportunity. And I made that happen. It took me 40 years, but way to kind of celebrate that, I thought, oh, I know what I want to do. I'll see if I can do a Ironman distance triathlon above 10,000 feet. I quickly looked up, I got up in the morning and I hadn't seen anything of that nature organized. I didn't see anything online about anybody had ever done anything like that. And I thought, man, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want to test myself at that kind of elevation. And I quickly called a buddy up who I do a lot of this nutty stuff with. And I'm like, dude, I got the perfect thing for us this year. We could do this. And I was trying to sell the whole concept to him. I'll rent a cabin, and we'll do the event, and, we'll finish, and we'll have, a shot of whiskey when we're done. It's going to be epic. It'll be this whole mountain man kind of thing. And the whole mountain man thing kind of came together because as a boy, I was, highly influenced by the film Jeremiah Johnson. I don't know if you're acquainted with it, but it was about a mountain, a veteran of, I think it was probably the Mexican-American War, who had, come to Colorado, become a mountain man, get away from society, and test his ability to survive, in the, in the environment in the Rocky Mountains. And anyway, I thought, man, it's perfect kind of legacy, test. He immediately was like, well, maybe we could do that like in Denver. We don't have to go up that high, and we can do it right.
Trying to hedge it already.
We're going to Utah or do it out there. And I'm like, no, like, you don't get it. And quickly I realized that, look, this is my path, right? Wasn't his path. And if I'm going to do this thing, I got to figure it out on my own. That year didn't work out. I couldn't figure out how to put it together. In 2019, I was busy doing some other stuff, but then, 2020, COVID hit, everything got shut down. I got sick in March and April, and things got quiet, and I was still out there training every day and kind of doing my thing. And I thought, there's no Leadville series happening this year. So the trails are open. And, I could probably sneak up there and get this thing done and not, have the impact of other races going on and that kind of thing. So on a very short couple week notice, I looked at the calendar and I'm like, man, I'm going to pull the trigger on this thing. I'm going to see if I can do this. I wasn't quite, prepared or trained like I wanted to be, but, I had this, I had a good foundation of fitness going, and I thought, I want to see if I can, if I can punch through this thing. So I called my son up and said, hey, if you could, I could use some help up there, just keeping an eye on me. I'm going to attempt to do this thing. And immediately he was all over, and he's like, I'll get my buddy, my college buddy here to come up, and we could do some filming. And, and kind of be there to support you. So, yeah, August 2020, I forget the exact day, it might have been the 8th or something. We went up to Leadville on a Friday and set up camp. And I'd been up there a couple of weekends trying to figure out logistically, because I wanted to do this off road, right? Like, how can I find enough, 100 plus miles of biking terrain and enough trail to be able to keep it off road, knowing that I'm not going to have any supports, aid stations or whatever. So I have to work out of a hub and be able to come back and self-support myself on this thing. And so I kind of threw some concepts together of trail, used the majority of the Leadville 100 mountain bike course. And the Colorado Trail runs around Twin Lakes there. And I navigated around it a little bit. And I thought this would be perfect. So we set up camp and I had my cousin and a buddy who were going to come up and kind of pace me on the run through the night, because my real objective was, can I get all of the biking in before dark? Yeah, I don't want to be biking at night. It brings on a whole nother set of risk. I don't mind running through the night, but I don't want to bike through the night. And if I am running through the night, I'm not in that great a running shape right now. I'm going to be pretty remote in a good section of this. It'd be great if I had somebody with me, just in case I can't get up, and so I talked two guys coming up to kind of help me pace through a section or two. I got up in the morning, spent the night freezing, didn't, misjudged the overnight temps. They got in the low 30s. I get up in the morning, my son said to me, "Dad, it's really cold, like 30, 40 degrees. I don't think you should get in the water right now." I'm not really built for that cold weather, the cold water. But I said, "Yeah, you're probably right. I'm gonna jump on a bike. I'm gonna bang out, maybe an hour to bike, let the sun come up a little bit, let my body warm up," because I made the mistake of sleeping outside my sleeping bag that night and woke up cold, and see if I can get warmed up, and then we'll start. So about 8:30, I got in the water. And again, made another mistake. They had released the dam and the water levels changed. So the water topography changed on me. When I was in the water, I was swimming and I didn't realize I'd made a wrong turn. I swam into a, kind of a dead end in a lagoon area and had to turn around, come back out, get back on course, what was at least my course. And it put me in the water about 20 minutes longer than I had anticipated. And I didn't realize it, but I'd slipped into hypothermia. And I came out of the water. I had this mental confusion. When I stopped, I looked, my hands were all clawed up, and I thought, "Oh man, like you were out here too long. You're just too exposed now." And then I started slipping into like stage 3 hypothermia. I completely lost my motor skills. I lost my ability to speak, and my jaw locked up, and I realized I was in trouble. And then I also come to the realization that I'd further screwed up because I'd put some people around me who, had cared about me in a situation where now they were kind of responsible for my livelihood. And I knew what was going on, physiologically, and they didn't, and I had no way of communicating to them. And I remember looking at my son, he had his hands on my knees and was just focused in my eyes and, hoping that I was going to be able to communicate with him and give him some directive. And I could see him starting to well up. And I thought, man, what'd you do? Like, you gotta pull yourself out of this thing. Like you have to pull yourself out of this. And anyway, I was able to kind of communicate a little bit and said, "Look, you got to get this wetsuit off me. And I need to ingest some warm fluid. I got to warm my core." And they went right to work and got me some hot water and sipped on that and got me dried off and wrapped me in blankets, put me out in the sun. It was probably an hour and a half, and I went at after drop. Then I started flopping around like a fish. It was horrible. It was a horrible experience to go through and watch. But I came out of it and I was like, I feel good. Like I'm hungry, but I think I'm good. And, they were kind of pleading with me not to attempt anything else, but I really felt like I was okay. Some of that was just the adrenaline of just coming out of what I just come out of. But I said, look, keep me in your eyesight. I want to get on a bike. I want to see what I can do. And I ended up getting I think it was 83 miles in that night before sunset. And I felt good. I pushed the first 40 some miles of the bike a little too hard because I was still kind of running on that adrenaline.
Right.
But nightfall, I was wrecked. I was just wrecked. And it kind of all caught up with me. And my buddy was going to pace me, didn't arrive yet. My son said, Dad, look, nobody's clocking here. Like, why don't you just rest? Why don't you just rest for a little bit and then get back at it, which was good advice. And I did. And I woke up an hour, 2 hours later, looked at my watch, heart rate was running about 85. And I thought, okay, it's showing a little bit of stress, but man, I feel good. I want to get in the woods. I want to get after it. And I woke my buddy up who had arrived to come pace me. And he was kind of reluctant to get up and go because he had just fallen asleep. And I said, look, I'm going to make some coffee. I'm going to get something to eat. And I'm going to get on the trail. And if you happen to feel like getting up and joining me, that'd be awesome. And he did. And so we hit the trail and started running. And anyway, we ended up getting it done. And the whole experience for me became much more than an emotional, or I'm sorry, physical breakthrough. It was in what I was looking to accomplish from a, physical and mental, test. It ended up delivering so much more. When I was setting off to do this, Jess, there's a guy named Will Turner. He's a friend of mine. He's a world record holder. He had set off a couple of years ago to do 100 Ironmans. He's going to start off to do 60 at the age of 60. Mm-hmm. He ended up doing 100. I think total in his career, maybe 105. Awesome guy. And I'd called him up when I told him what I was contemplating. And he's like, Sam, that sounds like an awesome feat. I've not been in Leadville. I know the series. I understand. I've never done anything that high. It sounds like, it'll be quite the task for you. I'm happy for you. He's like, just remember when you're out there, doing that to, be grateful for for your ability to do it and the reasons that, you're out there. And I said, yeah, it's even more than that. I pulled in the Jeremiah Johnson thing and I told him, I said, I don't know if you know, but Leadville, actually was the home of Jeremiah Johnson, the real Jeremiah Johnson, for a short period of time. So this thing's all kind of coming together as a legacy event for me. And he said, Sam, I remember the movie well. It came out summer of, I think it was 1972. And the reason I know that, he said, my sister Crandall and her boyfriend went to see the movie when it was released. And when she was leaving the movie theater, she was killed in a car accident. And it was literally the last thing that she had seen. And I was like, man, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring up, harsh memories and stuff. And he said, no, actually just the opposite. He said, do me a favor, when you're out there, dedicate one of those hard miles to Crandall. And, sure as shit, I think it was like mile 17 in the run. I'm coming up on this little berm that I'd already run once, I don't know, maybe 40 foot of an incline, and I'm like, my cousin's with me and he's talking and I'm just frustrated and I'm miserable and I want this thing to end. And I'm like looking at this little hill and I'm like, I'm so over this. I don't want to run anymore. And I got another hill to run and whatever. And right then it hit me and I thought of Crandall. And, that was enough inspiration to knock the day off. But when I was closing the thing out, it was almost anticlimactic. Like, it was going to happen. I knew I was right there. I was going to finish. I'd been through this stuff and overcome it, whatever. Sun had been up. It's a new day. And I started to realize, like, wow, this thing was never about just, hitting this new benchmark, like from a physical standpoint or testing myself emotionally. It was about having this whole experience and this whole new journey. And so it was a very fulfilling, task. But it's spawned a lot more than that for me, emotionally and physically. And so we are set right now to kick off an invitation only July of 2022. We've got some athletes lines up to come out and give it a test, and we're going to try to film and promote the event. I'm really excited about some of the folks that are joining me. I think Will Turner is going to be on the list, and he's not a mountain biker, but he's going to give it a go. And we want to be able to profile and spread the inspiration of what drives these type of people to go out and test themselves in those kind of capacities.
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be a pretty cool event. So is there any way to put it on the calendar? Is it just checking out on No Zero Days?
Yeah, more to come. We just put a stake in the sand. July 16th is the proposed date for the event. NOZERODAYS.com. We'll certainly have information on it. It'll be shared, on other media platforms. As I mentioned, it's going to be an invite only kind of a thing this year, but it should be a lot of fun.
So you'll want to follow No Zero Days, but before we finish, so I have to ask you a question so I ask a single question to all guests for a single year, and I change the question every year. So the question I'm going to ask you, I think, especially given that, I'll be interested to see what you say. It's something that a lot of people don't do, and I think they need to do. So that's why it's my question this year. And that question is, how do you celebrate your wins?
So for me, wins have taken on, different perspective over the years. And, I'd like to think it's not just because I've become older, I'll call it more mature, but I think I've learned along the way that, and I've shared this with other athletes. We were talking about, the mental component and coaching other people and helping them with the mental aspect of training versus, just the physical component. And particularly in, those folks that have gone through injuries or other setbacks, if your focus is just on the win, or your focus is on getting back to where you were, let's say from a comeback or recovery standpoint, and that period or that process, maybe in a comeback, is defined by your doctor, by your PT, or whatever it is, as 9 months or 12 months. And if the win in the event or the goal is defined as this much training, 6 months training, 12 months of training, these intervals, these benchmarks, these tests along the way, whatever it is, and it's to get to the win, when you finish, you might just get a t-shirt. But if you're present and you're open during the process, during the journey, if you will, and you're mindful of what's happening during that process, you've got so much more to gain. If you're mindful and you're aware and you're present, through your comeback, you've got so much more to gain when you get there than just being where you were before. You've got growth, you've got new knowledge, you've got expansion. So it may not be the answer that you're looking for, but I celebrate the win by being aware during the journey and trying to pull as much out of that journey as I can, so that when I get to the win, I get more. I've got a bunch of t-shirts in the drawer, but I've got a lot, better memories and experiences than I do t-shirts.
Yeah. No, there's no answer that I'm looking for. And that's kind of the exact point is I try to have these questions where hopefully every week, but maybe more often than not, I end up getting a novel or, surprise answer that maybe I hadn't thought of. So it's kind of the point, is trying to be a little bit thought provoking and think about the things that maybe we don't think about. Sam, where can people catch up with you, check out No Zero Days, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you bet. Jesse, thanks for the opportunity, and appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing it, man. I think people are finding a lot of value in what you're bringing to them. Certainly you can get more information at NOZERODAYS.com or No Zero Days on Facebook. nzdcolorado@gmail. If you want to email me directly, happy to chat with folks, share what I can. Always enjoy the collaboration and learning from others. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thanks for hanging out with me today, Sam.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, bud. Thanks.